Hello and welcome to the Celtic Huddle podcast. Well, a special Celtic Huddle podcast. I'm sure you'll know where we're going with this one. I'm Mark Wilson. Today I'm joined by the legend, which is Murdo McLeod from home. And we're also joined by Kieran Devlin from The Athletic. Kieran covers Celtic and has the inside track in this catastrophic campaign so far. John McGarry from the Daily Mail will also be joining us, and John has been close to the major Celtic stories all week, and we'll get his insight into what's went on and who may be coming in. On today's podcast, we'll reflect on Neil Lennon's tenure as Celtic manager and examine where it all went wrong. We'll also look ahead to the men in the frame to succeed Neil Lennon and the qualities they bring to the job. So it's a 1 hour special, so let's get on with it. Also, we want to hear from you, the Celtic fans. Get your questions in. Once again, we'll read out as many as you can, and we want to hear from you, the Celtic fans, especially on who you think the new appointment should be. Get your names in. There's that many names flying about just now that no name is too off limits for us. So get them in, we'll discuss them, and we'll see where it takes us. I'm delighted to say, once again, the podcast is now sponsored by First Star Legends Gin, First Class Transfers and Social Recluse. We thank them all for their support. So let's get to it. No time to waste, guys. Murdo, Neil and Celtic parted company on Tuesday night. What was your feelings? Were you surprised it was Tuesday night? Were you surprised at the timing of the full thing?
Very strange, because the last 4 months, you're thinking after a bad result, he's going to leave the club, and it just went on and on and on. And now it's getting to the stage that he just felt that he was going to stay on till Rangers actually won the league. And then after the Ross County game, then everything's all talk. Neil's left the club. So it was, yeah, you're surprised, but you're not surprised, because it just went on too long. That it should have happened a lot earlier.
Yeah, listen, Kieran Devlin here. Thanks very much, Kieran, for joining us. You know, you've been constantly watching Celtic, and you've written articles in The Athletic about them. Anybody who doesn't follow them, I'd recommend them. Hugely informative. Kieran, should have happened sooner. Were you surprised by the timing of this?
I think I was a little bit it just seems, you know, especially not necessarily after the autumn. I think, you know, if we're talking about a window in which the season could have been salvaged, I think the window was probably between the Rangers defeat, the 2-0, and I want to say the end of the November international break, which was just before the 2-2 draw at Easter Road. Effectively at this point, the Ross County game was a dead rubber, if we're going to be completely blunt. And, you know, you look at Ian Bankier's statement last week to the fans, in which I think most people inferred was maybe not an explicit message of support for Neil, but there was a sense of backing him, and especially the line about how the manager has addressed each and every game. So it just feels a bit peculiar that it was this one defeat to Ross County, you know, after a 5-game winning run. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, listen, I would agree with that. And Murdo, you've touched on it as well there. There seem to have been a lot more damaging results to Neil Lennon than a 1-0 away on a Sunday night when the league's done. And it does just beg the question, what were the Celtic hierarchy waiting for? Kieran, I was reading some of your bits and pieces earlier on, and you wrote you were in touch with somebody who maybe had a feeling of some of the players at the start of January. You believed there was a decline, or some of them thought there was a decline in standards. Do you think that's what's got Celtic into this hole, that the players' standards have dropped? You know, on what's expected from them, for the manager, they dropped their standards, leading to this hole they're in just now?
I think to an extent, yeah. I think it's important to say that, well, that was some of the players. There were other players as well who, you know, were supportive of the manager, who didn't really, they were a bit confused about why these things were happening, because they were doing, you know, in training, they were going through the same sessions. They were the same philosophies and approach to games as what they had last season, and obviously last season was far more successful than this one. I think it's maybe not so much. I think Lennon has been integral to a big part of that, but I think there's also an issue about Celtic and how Celtic is run as a club. you're looking. We're going to touch on what's going to happen this summer with a new CEO, a new manager, and what's very probably a new sporting director model. I think, as you know, is the idea is that a manager has full reign over things like fitness, things like stats and analytics, video analysis. A lot of modern clubs now, those are like separate departments with separate heads of them who they have their own standards which have to be met with somebody, the director of football or the sporting director having over that. And then the manager's job is just to coach and manage the players. I do wonder if this is just Celtic reaching its logical conclusion because there are boundaries being blurred between whose responsibilities is where. So I do think maybe this is a turning point, if nothing else, in the long term.
Yeah, it's a good point, Kieran. I mean, Murdo, I was at Celtic with Neil first time round. Now, I don't think he'll be the first to say that football has moved on since. I mean, that was 2010, 2011. Since then, hugely. And Neil, I think Kelvin Wilson, who we had on Tuesday, had said in previous articles that Neil wasn't particularly, into diets and stuff like that, or a lot of videos and that, but he did love running the players, and it was an older school thing. But in your opinion, Murdo, is it a total overhaul the club needs in terms of structure, where the manager stands, like Kieran's saying, in terms of fitness, dietitians, analysts, everything needs to be brought more up to date?
Yeah, I think obviously that's the modern day football that you've got all the people, the dietitians and all that round about the football club. But they do their own job. Do you know what I mean? Neil Lennon's not going to go in and sit and beside a player and say, oh, don't eat this at lunchtime and all that kind of thing. It's up to the other people who's in whatever party they're in. They've got to make sure it's done to the best of their abilities. And it's the same for Neil Lennon. It's the players on the pitch in the training ground. Neil's got to make sure the players are at their top fitness and everything, and how they play the game of football. And I think it's all right pointing fingers all around the place. I think the biggest thing, we spoke about it 2 weeks ago on our show when we were talking about the players instead of Neil Lennon. And I think the players have got to take so much responsibility, because I have never seen a Celtic team play as poorly as this.
Yeah. Listen, here's a point. First point coming in today, SMCR. Overall club morale and motivation has clearly dropped due to lack of a long-term direction and plan. Next coach and director of football need to build a clear plan for everyone to get behind him. We'll come on to that later on more in depth. But Kieran, how big a role has poor summer recruitment played in the club's downfall this season?
I think it's quite hard to divorce, some of the recruitment from what's going on. I think one of the things most recently that people were talking about was missing out on Ivan Toney, who's obviously been a huge success at Brentford. But it's quite hard. Brentford are such a well-oiled machine with such a clear philosophy to how they do things. I'm not sure it's as black and white as Toney would have been a massive success and Ajeti would have been a massive failure at Brentford. I think it's slightly more complicated than that. It's hard to say. Like, Barkas has obviously been a massive disappointment for his price tag. Ajeti still doesn't look fit. Like, he's shown glimpses of quality. Like, he's clearly a very talented finisher. There's questions over the service, but I think the big issue that hanging over it was Shane Duffy. He's a guy. Given the loan fee for him and that Celtic are reportedly paying his wages, that's almost £4 million they spent on a guy they don't technically own. And when you look at the type of player Duffy is and the type of football that Celtic normally play, where they're normally on the front foot, they have most possession, they like to play with a high line, so their centre-backs need to be generally quite athletic, they generally need to be quite fit, like fast and good on the ball. Shane Duffy's like an old school 18-yard box defender. Like, that's his game. That's what he's good at. And what you could argue he's not been good at that this season, on top of the other stuff he's been asked to do. But it just seems to be a very strange move. It didn't seem to fit in terms of what Celtic were going for there. So I think there's definitely an issue between what the type of players the managers want what Lennon wanted necessarily, and the type of players that were coming in from the recruitment.
So we'll go into the manager odds and who's in the running later. But what you mean there, as in the team's identity, the way they want to play, I don't think anybody can mistake the way they wanted to play under Brendan Rodgers and the type of player he brought in. But I looked a bit disjointed then, that the way Neil wanted to play, but the players that were coming in probably didn't suit that.
I think with Neil, I think last season was a really happy medium between Rodgers' style football and Neil's style football. Like when you look at both in his first time when you were there, Mark, and in this one, he was all about letting players express themselves, giving players a platform to go and improvise in the moment. Whereas, Brendan had very exact systems of how he wants everything to be all the time. And I think some players felt like suffocated by that by the end of the 2.5 years. And I think last season in particular, they still had a lot like the systems and all the training drills and stuff like that. They still had those in place and they were still in their memory. But Neil also allowed them to express themselves and they felt liberated, if that makes sense. They could go and show their quality and improvise and show their ingenuity. And I feel, like this is just my impression, it's speculation. Like I don't think anyone can have like a very as detailed an insight as possible into what's gone wrong, because I don't think no one in Scottish football, even in their wildest dreams, could have expected it to happen as it happened. But I just feel like some of those, like an over-reliance on individual quality, has been the downfall this season. Like there has been some times where players have just been running, like opposition players can run through gaps in midfield because there doesn't seem to be much sense of shape or structure. And I do think that's a big thing with the recruitment as well. There doesn't seem to be a lot of joined up thinking, if that makes sense, between the recruitment and what the coach is looking for. Yeah, no, I get that.
Listen, one man, Murdo, who will know a great deal of what's went wrong this season and in the dressing room and on the pitch is Scott Brown. Now, he's gone public to say that the players have let Neil Lennon down. Is that a wee bit too late for that?
I would say so. I'm a big admirer of Scott Brown. I think he's a battler, and to wait till so long, because he's the captain. He should have been out a long time ago saying about the players they're not giving their 100%, and whether some of the players are not settling down at the club. If they don't settle at the club, then don't play them. But you can't put people in on the pitch and expect them just to all of a sudden play really well, and that's not happened with Celtic. And the amount of silly goals we've given away, defence has been shocking. And you're looking at it. So I think Scott Brown should have had a real go at the players when it all first started. But I still think the biggest part, though, Mark, I think the European campaign has really been horrendous for Celtic this year. The amount of goals and bad goals being lost against average sides in European games has just been very poor.
Yeah.
I think that maybe started the whole thing. Because
it did. Of course, it meant so much to the Celtic fans, and European football always does. But the parallels from this season to last season under Tony Mowbray are quite, uncanny. And you're saying there Scott should have had a real go at the players. And is it too late to say let the manager down? I was there. Listen, I played in the game that Tony Mowbray ultimately got the sack. I was probably culpable for a couple of the goals in that night in St Mirren, and it wasn't through lack of trying, but it just was something wasn't getting across to the players to perform on the pitch, and there was plenty of good players at that time who should have done better, me included, but it just didn't happen. He just couldn't drag the best out of that squad of players. Perhaps that's what's happened to Neil. It's a different team from what Neil had 10 years ago, who were much different individuals, who were probably older and more streetwise than this Celtic team. And it's, ultimately cost Tony's job. As soon as Neil came in, Neil motivated that group of players and went on to have great success. So, Scott maybe could have done more. I don't know, but I'm sure he looked about and thought, sometimes when I'm not performing. Sorry, on you go, Murdo.
I don't think it's the likes of Scots taking the blame for anything, but I still think if he's coming out just now to say about the players, it should have been done a long time ago, because it's as if it's all looking at pointing the finger at what players are not doing for the team. And when you're looking at around the football club, it's the new signings for this season. Lenny's team last year were still flying and winning everything, and they were asked to win. And then going into this season, what a start we had. Was it 5-1 against Hamilton, and everybody's thinking, here we go, 10 in a row. History's going to be made this year. And then all of a sudden, it's just going downhill, downhill. And there was nobody really having a kind of go, whether it's the new players. But again, Celtic have possibly been out signing players, decent players, but not decent for Celtic. You've got to have real quality for Celtic.
Well, Kieran leads us on to another point. Was Neil let down this season by the club's hierarchy? Did they do enough to help him as manager? We heard Tommy Johnson was on here a couple of weeks ago saying that Neil basically wanted him in the dugout beside him, but the powers that be pulled the plug on for some reason. We've heard other stories. Should the hierarchy have done more to support Neil?
It's hard to say. I think if you're talking about the money they gave out for signings for the 3 windows that the four windows in the end that Neil was permanent manager, it was about 35 million they've spent, which is far more than they spent with Rodgers, with Dyler, and even in Neil's first bit. It's probably the most they've spent since Martin O'Neill's era. I think there's definitely questions about how well that money was spent, but that's an issue for recruitment, maybe more than the CEO and the board and Dermot Desmond. In terms of his actual backroom staff, I think that's bad potential issue, because I think there's other stuff, as you say, with Tommy Johnson. I've heard other stuff about Gary Parker, and it's whether that level of control. It comes back to the level of control they were willing to afford Neil Lennon, and I do think that after the way Brendan Rodgers left things, I do think there was a reluctance to give a manager that level of control again, because as we saw, he left with most of the backroom staff, a lot of the scouting resources, a lot of the analytics resources, and I do wonder if the club wanted some degree of control over that situation, and having John Kennedy there, I think there was. I've heard that Gavin Strachan was more Kennedy's guy than Lennon's. I think that they didn't double down on Lennon. They didn't give him their full support, but who knows how it might have turned out otherwise. It might have been better. It could have been worse. So it's all a subject to speculation.
Listen, I agree with you 100%. I think if you're going to have a successful club, and especially in this season, all seasons, you have to give the manager full control of what he wants to get the best out of his team. I don't think you can go half measures, and I think you're right with Brendan Rodgers. He did have full control. Look at the success he got. Martin O'Neill did have full control. Look at the success he got. I don't think it's a coincidence when you take away most of that control and you tie managers' hands behind their backs that you see the results. But look, gents, what is Neil's legacy? Then, Murdo, start with yourself. What is he going to be remembered for? I know there's a lot of anger out there just now. You read in social media, there's always anger about everything, but you read a lot of negative comments about Neil Lennon just now. But once this dies down, how will he be remembered?
Well, obviously, just what you're saying, once this dies down, because obviously this was a historic year for Celtic, and it's not happened, and Neil's been part of it, and he's been the manager of the football club, and they didn't win 10 in a row. So all the Celtic fans are not happy about it. Just now, they're very angry, and then the next couple of matches, when Rangers eventually win the league, then that's it, all stamped, that's them won the league. They've stopped 10 in a row. But Neil Lennon, fantastic achievement at Celtic Football Club as a player, good fighter, good battler, good player, won a lot of trophies, and similar with the first time in the management. Then he comes back to the club again, and then he wins the the trebles again. So Neil's been a fantastic person for Celtic Football Club, and this is the wrong time to judge him, because obviously everybody's gutted for the 10 in a row. Everybody's gutted, but he's done so much for the club, and I don't think you can say an awful lot. And again, I still put my looking at what's happened at the club, and you're looking at the players. The manager's doing his job, and he's fighting as much as he can to get things going. But the players, every Celtic supporter has been sitting watching their television and shouting at the television about the way players have been playing, the way they've defended. Because I think first time you're looking at Celtic's defence every game, there's always something happening in that game. Teams should have no chances against Celtic, and Celtic are giving them chances all the time. And things like that, it's happened the whole season. And you're looking at Julian, you're looking at Duffy, you're looking at Aya, you're looking at all these big guys at 6'5", and they're not defending well enough.
Yeah. Kieran, and listen, what do you think his legacy will be? How will he be remembered in, say 3 years' time? Will he be remembered as the guy who lost 10 in a row and presided over this disastrous season, or will he be remembered for the successes that he had as a manager and the trophies he delivered?
It's a big question, and I think it's going to differ hugely on a fan-to-fan basis. I really do. I think it's going to be massive. I think there will be some people who will never forgive him for this season, and that they'll view his legacy as has been tarnished. And then there will be others who do feel like 5-10 years, as Murdo was saying, that they will reflect on what he's done over 20 years rather than just on one, and feel that he is a Celtic legend. I do think it's just going to be a very divisive topic. I know I don't know about you both, but scrolling through Twitter yesterday and day one of it happening, it was a very fevered debate, and I can't see that going away anytime soon. But I think that's part of the fun with being Celtic. We've all got different views on on everything that's going on.
I mean, it's a tough gig to take, is it not? The Celtic manager's job. No matter how successful you are, if you have a bad season, especially this season, then all your good work might go to waste. Guys, let's move on then. The next manager and what the club have to do to bring somebody, that'll appease the Celtic fans. So, gents, many names are in the frame. We've got Steve Clarke, Frank Lampard, Eddie Howe, Roy Keane, David Moyes, Xabi Alonso, I heard getting mentioned. Mark Hughes has also been mentioned. The guy that's in the hot seat just now, John Kennedy, I mean, among plenty others. Kieran, who are the realistic contenders, do you think? Would one be interested, and two Celtic can attract to come?
It's hard to tell, because you think about the type of candidate that Celtic have historically gone for, at least since we'd say since the start of the Martin O'Neill era in 2000. They have, apart from Ronnie Dyler, who's the outlier here, they have been Scottish or Irish or had a previous club connection. But things have completely changed now, as we're going to touch on to. How much influence will Dominic Mackay have in this decision? How much influence would the new sporting director or director of football? Is it more important to bring in the director of football before bringing in a manager, and then the director of football has a say in who the new manager will be? As we're going to touch on very shortly, there's such a period of, not crisis isn't the wrong word, but I guess with a crisis is an opportunity. There's Celtic can it's not just rebuilding the team, it's rebuilding their identity, what sort of club they want to be now. There's people with this director of football model, a new coach, a new CEO. This could be an entirely different club in 6, 12, 18 months' time. I'm getting away from your question here, but I think realistic, it's quite hard to tell. Someone like Eddie Howe, I think, would be in the Brendan Rodgers mould, someone with something to prove afterwards. In England, who's got a very good record of developing players, and I think that's probably the most important thing for Celtic now. is getting someone with a really good track record of developing players, because their business model is so firmly attached to buying young players with potential, 2 or 3 years at the club where they develop into really good players, then sell them on for 15, 20, 25 million. I think in a business and sporting sense, that's the kind of coach they should be going for. And there are some players there who I think would fit. Someone like, Steve Clarke. And there's some issues that people might argue that he's never been in charge of a team like Celtic, where they're expected to play really attacking football and win most games rather than be very well organised. Everyone knows their roles very well. And I think, I know Steve Clarke really enjoys international football as well. The other names, it's hard to tell. It's such an unknown at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah, listen, there's lots of names out here. Somebody just put Ralph. Edward Land just put Ralph Ragnick would be my choice. Style of football suits us. I know how to turn a club around from top to bottom. Kieran Laverty there touching underneath him. I don't think we need a British manager, but possibly someone who knows football around the UK. The implications of Brexit will be massive, and it shouldn't be underestimated. Jonathan Grieve, Lucien Favre for new manager for me. Excellent pedigree. His teams play good attacking football, not dissimilar to Brendan Rodgers, and I think he would be right at the top end of realistic candidates. John McGarry's just come in as well. Murdo, John, we'll just get to you in a second. Murdo, any names that stand out for you at this moment in time?
Well, you've got a massive list just now, and I think people like Steve Clarke will be in their thoughts. But first and foremost, I still think the new manager should be in the next couple of weeks. Because you either sit.
You think so? Yeah, you think that's a possibility, though, Murdo? Sorry.
Because I think it's exact same as Brendan Rodgers. He's got to come in and look at the players he wants to keep and get rid of most of the ones he wants to get rid of. And I think that's going to happen. And it's the same with Dominic Mackay, changing the things. Peter Lawwell's been there, but he's still running the club. And it'll be maybe his decision what's going to happen. And I think Dominic Mackay's got to come in earlier as well. And I know the rugby union were saying, oh no, he's not going to leave us until the contract's up. But I think it would be great to get the two of them, a manager and the chief executive, coming in at the same time, and getting the choices you've got. Because if you leave for another 3 or 4 weeks, there'll be a lot of clubs changing their managers, and you might lose one or two good quality managers.
Yeah, well, here Francis Lester's just put, a lot of fans still have a fear that John Kennedy, that is, will get this job, me included. John, thanks for joining us again. Look, just a point there on some of the front runners that we were making for the next manager. I mean, there's loads of names, right? But Steve Clarke seems to be a front runner just now. I've heard Roberto Martinez is one of the dream appointments, along with Sean Maloney. Is it a possibility that one of those two could take it with the Euros coming up? Now, the Scotland's first game in the Euros, 14th of June against Czech Republic. Their last game, if we get put out the group, is the 22nd of June against Croatia. Belgium, 12th of June against Russia, the first game. Their last game, 21st of June against Finland. If they progress, the final's on the 11th of July. Now, Champions League qualifiers, you don't need me to tell you, are just round the corner in mid-July, where Celtic will head into. Would Celtic risk that for a manager of that kind of pedigree? Would they say, yeah, go to the Euros with a country as long as you're back in 10 days before the Champions League qualifier?
It's certainly a huge consideration in this whole thing, isn't it? There's no getting away from that. It'd be unrealistic, for example, if you went after Roberto Martinez, just to expect him not to go to the Euros with Belgium. Clearly, that's not going to happen. Then time becomes a real factor in the whole thing. So I think in terms of Steve Clarke, Roberto Martinez, that would certainly be a downside to their cases. I'm not to say that they wouldn't be considered, but it's certainly an issue there. Someone like Eddie Howe doesn't have anything like that on the horizon, so you would imagine that would be something in his favour. I think that the point Murdo makes is a good one. I mean, Celtic have effectively got 8 dead rubbers now. I mean, John Kennedy, as things stand, is in charge for them. But this is really a a sort of window of opportunity for somebody to come in, spend half a dozen games assessing the squad in a competitive environment and make decisions on that basis, not when pre-season training starts in the kind of third week in June.
Yeah. Listen, a point here for Stephen Coulthard says Alonso, next manager, doing well at Real Sociedad. Murdo, I know you have to go, so just before we let you go, give us a name. Who would you like to see out of this big list? Just give us one. Give us one, come on.
The list I'm looking at, and I think even the board would be thinking Steve Clarke. I think because he's been very successful in his last two jobs, when you look at the Waco Marnock, were very successful, and then Scotland, we're at the Euros now. But just what the boys have been saying, though, they're away working somewhere else. He's working with the national side. But again, you can maybe squeeze it out as long as you've got them tied up. Because I think at some point you've got to get your manager sooner than later. Don't leave him too late.
Yeah, well, look, Robbie Smith will take Martinez and Maloney, but not Clark for me. Murdo, we'll let you go. Thanks very much. Let you get your CV into the board. Maybe we'll be seeing you back at the club. See you, mate. Thanks. John and Kieran, look, you just mentioned something there, John, about 7 or 8 dead rubbers. Now, and somebody mentioned it when they put in their comment here, just saying that Celtic fans think there's a realistic possibility of John Kennedy getting a job. I touched on it earlier when Tony Mowbray lost his job. Neil Lennon was on the coaching staff, taking the reserve side. He got promoted. I think there was maybe nine dead rubbers, if you could call it that. It was pretty certain. Well, Rangers had the title wrapped up. Neil won, I think, every one of their games, apart from the Ross County in the semi-final, and got the job. Is there a realistic possibility of something like that happening, John?
Personally, I don't see it. I think John Kennedy's a very interesting character in the sense that he's very well thought of within Celtic Park. He's a very highly rated coach. But his problem is he's guilty by association with this season. And we're all aware of the stat that came out the other night of 43% of goals being lost from set pieces. Now, that doesn't speak well of a defensive coach when that sort of thing is happening.
But he's not, John, he's not a defensive coach.
Well,
John, that's like saying that Neil's a midfield coach and Gordon Strachan should have been a wingers coach, but
yeah, he's a
coaching
coach,
doesn't work like that.
He's a coach who's a former central defender. And in fairness to him, when he has been asked about this in the past, John has taken responsibility for it, and he said, "I do take the players, and I do, the kind of buck does stop with him to a large extent on that front." I think
maybe I'm just trying to spare my blushes for Brecon losing 7 goals as a defender.
I think though that. There's a possibility that John could play some role going forward, and I think some form of continuity would be welcome. But I don't see him as a potential head coach or indeed a kind of director of football / technical director. I think perhaps even moving back to maybe first team coach or indeed reserve level might be it for him.
Yeah, Robbie Smith said Kennedy is the easy option for the board. Will not have to pay a big wage, and he will be a yes man. Kieran, just on that, do you think, if a new manager is appointed, do you think John Kennedy will remain at the club in some capacity?
I'm not sure. I think So I was speaking to some people close to me yesterday. I had something go up this morning actually. Like John knows he's unpopular with a section of the support. Like you can't ignore it. He's a very grounded, realistic guy, and I think he's taking a look at these games and he's more looking at them as an opportunity to prove that he is a better coach and manager than what this season suggests for other clubs to look at. We know Hibs were interested in him before they appointed Jack Ross. And Celtic were reluctant to lose him then. I think it's more a case of like he's getting this on his CV that he's got 8 games as a manager. everyone I've ever spoken to about John Kennedy rates him really highly as a person and as a coach, but it's a world of difference between being a coach and being a head coach, being a manager. There's no certainty in translating that successfully, and who knows what Kennedy will do. But I just think I can see, if they win 8 games, the last 8 games, if they do really well, I think it would just be more of like an amicable farewell, is my impression. It would just be Kennedy go, he's had the best part of 3/4 of his life at Celtic since he was a young guy in the academy. They've been very good to him, and he's been good to Celtic. And he's come through all the way from when he was just a first team scout, through the youth teams, first team coach, assistant manager. I think he may be looking as that this is the right time to go and try his hand at being a manager somewhere else. I feel it feels it's a shame because he is so highly rated. As John was saying, there is the idea that it's guilt by association now. Like there is a taint there, which is a shame. And I feel like hopefully he goes and be a real success somewhere else, and maybe that legacy can change. But my impression that he's maybe the right guy at the right place, but just at the wrong time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Brian Murphy's saying here about appointing a manager, director of football is the big appointment. Forget about the manager until he's appointed. Paulie Day. Also, Celtic need an exciting appointment this season. It's the biggest appointment since Neil and Brendan Rodgers. Yeah, you would probably agree with that. Just on the appointment, guys, do you think, is there a situation that Dermot Desmond has already spoke to or appointed a manager but keeping it quiet, or do you think the real process has only started 72 hours ago? Kieran, you first.
I'm not sure. Like as you guys have already said, like Rodgers happened very quickly. Like that was something that advanced over a process of days rather than weeks. And that is something that could act again, because I think Desmond will be very wary now that these threats about season ticket renewals, about merchandise backlashes, I think he'll be wary of these, and he understands, given the predicament of the pandemic, they need every drop of income they can, especially since what is almost certainly going to be a massive clear out in the summer, a massive rebuild of the playing squad. And I think for the sake of Don Mackay as well, they need an inspiring appointment. Like he doesn't want to land and have his first thing be appointing a mediocre manager or a manager that fails. That doesn't speak well of his credibility as a CEO upon landing. So I think there's definitely a chance of it, but it just seemed like what happened after the Ross County game moved so fast. We heard of those emergency meetings right after the County game that I don't think there's conversations that have happened already, especially without the sporting director there, but there's definitely a possibility.
John, what do you think in that point? I mean, Dermot Desmond, we've seen him in the past. He sits there largely silent for most of what goes on, and even through the triumphs you'll hear an occasional quote or you'll see him at a cup final. But when big appointments are needed to be made, he's the one that largely takes control of the situation. Could there be a situation that he's got a guy up his sleeve ready to go, or is he just coming into play now?
I think he'll have a very good idea who he wants. To give Dermot Desmond his dues, when he has had to deliver, when Celtic have been in this situation in the past, he has delivered a big name appointment, whether it was Martin O'Neill back then or indeed Brendan Rodgers. I think, though, there's a kind of clamour at the moment, and quite a dangerous one in certain senses, that this has got to be a real big name, exciting appointment. I do understand that, and I get that it's got to have some sort of box office appeal in order to sell season tickets and merchandise. But what's far more important than that is that this is an appointment which is right, which is going to have sort of longevity, and isn't somebody that's just going to pop in for a couple of years en route to the Premier League. That's not what Celtic need. And some of the names that have been mentioned already would be exactly that. And yeah, it might give a kind of a shot in the arm in the short term. But this is really the moment in time where the club's got to be kind of redefining itself from top to bottom. And you've got to get people who are going to be invested for the long term and not just in for 2 years before they jump back down the road. I think that's that can't be lost in all this.
Yeah. Kieran, what about the director of football then? Should he be appointed first, so that their rules are clearly defined within the club to the head coach? Or I think somebody mentioned earlier, should it be the opposite, get the manager in and bring in a director of football? What way do you see this unfurling?
I think in an ideal scenario, you'd have the director of football in first. And I think it depends what type of director of football Celtic are bringing in, because it could be the glorified head of recruitment, or it's the guy I mentioned earlier who he oversees all football operations. So he oversees loans, he oversees the sports science and fitness department, he oversees parts of recruitment as well. But he helps all those, and the academy as well. That's another big thing that they do, is about the integration of the academy into the first team. It's a bit of an unknown in the moment what type of director of football model Celtic are going towards. I know some of the names that Celtic have looked at. We've heard Tugnodze at Juventus and Fergal Harkin at Man City. Two very different types of careers they've had so far. You've got one who's a scout and one who has been much more on the commercial side of things. So it's very anonymous at the moment. Well, I'd say you'd have the director of football in as quickly as possible, and you have a head coach in for pre-season. That's an ideal scenario. Obviously, things are slightly more complicated and difficult than that. But I think it will be interesting. And you would imagine that with Lennon leaving, and given how quickly that happened, they will be trying to accelerate the hiring of a director of football now.
Yeah, listen, Stephen McKeown, the point was up on the screen earlier, but just reading it on the side here, I think after Ronnie, the board pushed the boat out for Rodgers. I think they have to do it again after this season's failings. A good point. John, I mean, what would be a good partnership? See, in terms of director of football, do you think they have to have any previous knowledge of a head coach coming in? Do you think a director of football could just be in there and one of these names off this list comes in and the first time they meet them is across the table at Lennoxtown? Does there have to be a standing relationship there for things to work?
There doesn't have to be. I mean, you would probably prefer that, but given how relatively uncommon these systems are in British football clubs, the likelihood is they probably haven't worked together at some point. And, there's always an element of chance about that, but clearly the two individuals would have to, ensure they get along, they're on the same page in terms of the philosophy. Just in terms of the kind of the overall direction, I think one thing that seems to be established is that it's going to be very much more sort of data and analysis driven from top to bottom. So that's the entire club. So that would really be the kind of remit of the sporting director. And your head coach would really have to buy into that. In terms of the kind of names that we mentioned, I think Fergal Harkin's a fascinating one. He's obviously had some association with Celtic. It's not, it shouldn't be a deal breaker that, but I think it does help. I think Celtic have in the past had pretty good success out of people who have either worked for the club, played for the club, or have an affinity for it. I don't think that necessarily does any harm. I think that's why somebody like Sean Maloney would be of real interest. I think he's, obviously he's with Belgium at the moment. He was previously
as manager, John. Sorry, as manager or as a number two to Martinez.
I think Sean Maloney would be an interesting candidate as manager. I know it wouldn't maybe float everyone's boat, but I think in terms of a guy that's got a very keen coaching brain, somebody that can develop players, somebody that's very much into the science of the game and has clearly worked with the best players in the world with Belgium. I think Sean Maloney would be considered for that. I think it's probably more likely to be as a number two, if I'm being honest. And he might have to, look to tie in with somebody like an Eddie Howe. I don't see Roberto Martinez leaving Belgium. He's contracted to the World Cup. I think that's probably not going to happen. But, if you said to Maloney to come back as a number two to somebody like Eddie Howe, I think that would be a conversation he'd be interested in having.
Yeah, listen, I don't think you're far off with that one. I think those would be two names that would probably please a majority of the Celtic fans. If you get the right manager, right structure in place, can Celtic overturn this to become champions again next season? Is it an easy fix, or is there too much to be done this year where, there's a number of players that could be going out, up to 12 players realistically could be getting out the door? Is that too big a turnaround to be champions and progress into Champions League as well?
Yeah, it's going to be extremely difficult because, we've seen in the past where, both halves of the old firm have had terrible seasons, but have somehow turned it around with a change of manager. The most famous example in recent history was when Martin O'Neill came in and just turned a team that I think had finished 21 points behind into a team that won the league by 15 points or something like that. But he did bring in several serious players, and he inherited guys like Moravcik and Larson and so forth. As I've said before, this is probably the most transitional summer Celtic have had in living memory, and it extends from the dressing room through to the boardroom and the technical area. But there are a number of players there who could build a team round. But as we discussed the other day, you're looking at probably only 5 or 6 that ideally you would hang on to. So you're bringing a huge number of players, trying to integrate them. It's going to be really tough. And you go up against a Rangers team which is now established. They've done their business very early in January, getting new players in. So for that reason, the sooner they can get a director of football, preferably then followed by head coach, and the better, because they've got a monumental job in their hands to even close the gap next season.
Yeah, look, Kieran Laverty just there. Sean Maloney is the ideal shout going forward. You think he could be there for 45 years at least while this rebuild progresses. Craig F also, you can't appoint an Eddie Howe and then jail him, get him Sean Maloney as his assistant after people complaining about Neil Lennon didn't pick his men. I suppose that is a good point. Just as Timms says, Sean Maloney as an assistant but not a manager who's not got the experience. Don Mackay has to show his ambition and his appointment of our new manager at Celtic and get fans on side instantly. Kieran, that brings me on nicely to this next point then. New players have to come in. Well, new manager first and foremost, but of course you need 11 to 12 players like we're touching on there to probably bolster the squad. Loan players going back, players out of contract, players potentially moving on. How equipped is Don Mackay to do this? Now, we all know he's been in the rugby side of the game. Peter Lawwell was in charge of this operation for so long, so he knew the ins and outs, football contracts, agents, everything connected to that side of the game. Is Don Mackay going to come in and be able to do that straight from the off?
No, which is why they're hopefully bringing in a director of football. You also look at Don Mackay's background is in media and communications. I was interviewing some people about what they can expect from Don Mackay, and it was commercial based. It is from a ticketing and marketing perspective. It wasn't renovations in the sporting side of things. And I think it's absolutely crucial. Again, we come back to getting this appointment of the director of football in as soon as possible is so important to this, because they need to, if they are going to let these players like Aya and Edouard go, they need to get out the door as quickly as possible so that money can income and they can buy the replacements, because they didn't do it in January. I think the Champions League is too much of an ask at this stage. I think
so, yeah.
First round in the non-champions route, they're going to come across teams like Ajax, and even the third rounds, never mind the playoff round. I think they should give it a go, and it would be amazing if it did happen, but it would take a real miracle for a new manager with an entirely new squad of players in a very tumultuous period of the club's history to get that over the line. But they've got to do as best as they can, because I think no European football at all would be a real upset to things. And just so they can hit the ground running for the league when the league does start. It's so crucial to just get a couple of wins straight out the door. Yeah, I think they need director of football in preferably in the next couple of weeks, head coaching before pre-season. It's all about those appointments now. And to an extent, we've discussed what Kennedy does now. And I think, obviously, fans, they're going to watch these 8 games because that's what fans do. they watch the football games regardless of whether they're dead rubbers or not. But
Yeah.
I think more eyes will be off what's going on off the pitch than on it at this point.
Yeah, look, here's Stephen Coulthard here. Don Mackay has to pick the new manager, not Lawwell. John, in that case then, should Celtic be speaking to the SRU at this minute to get Don Mackay through the door just now?
They were asked that question yesterday, weren't they? And it was a kind of quite a firm rebuttal. Now, things can change. Obviously, there's a certain element of kind of posturing there because there'll be compensation due. I'm sure if the SRU identify his successor and he was able to start within a reasonably short time frame, then some arrangement could be arrived at. I think one important point, though, is that I don't think Don Mackay will really appoint the manager. Dermot Desmond will appoint the manager, if history tells us anything. I think Don Mackay will be hugely consulted on it and will have a big input into it. But fundamentally, I think this will be Dermot Desmond's call. He's appointed Dominic Mackay. I think Dominic Mackay will then take care of the day-to-day running of it. But I think the final approval of the manager will rest with Dermot Desmond. So I don't think that Dominic Mackay, even if he doesn't start till July the 1st, I don't think that will be necessarily an impediment to the manager being appointed.
If that's the case, John, if Dermot Desmond is the man who will appoint the next manager and not director of football, Don Mackay, it's got to be a blockbuster name then, is it not? It's got to be one of the biggies. Dermot Desmond isn't going to come out and say, this is my man, I've picked him, and it's an up-and-coming young manager. Dermot Desmond surely only gets involved when it's the big hitters. I could see if it was a director of football. Kieran Laverty here has mentioned Rasmus Ankerson as director of football from Brentford. Look at how well he's done with a budget. If it's someone like that and he brings in a young European manager, then you could clearly see that's his appointment. But you can't tell me Ronnie Dyler was Dermot Desmond. That was a project. So if it's Dermot, it's got to be a big name, is it not?
Well, he will appreciate the need for PR here, to get people on side, to get people excited. But I think at the same time, he'll also realise that it can't be a flash in the pan. It can't be somebody that's going to be, almost immediately looking to go back down south. I mean, the Rodgers appointment, obviously, it chimed with everybody at the time, but it was only ever going to be for 2 or 3 years. And I think that's what Celtic have to avoid here. They've got to get people that are in and are invested for the long term and are going to put things in place that they're going to oversee. There is maybe, somewhere in there is maybe a happy balance. If it was Eddie Howe and Sean Maloney, for example, if Eddie Howe was agreeable to having Sean Maloney, I think that would have enough kind of cachet about it, with his Premier League experience, Maloney's experience of Celtic, but also, kind of be quite intriguing. And I think you could see the club was maybe going down a different road there. So, somebody like Roy Keane, for example, which would maybe have a bit of a wow factor, I think would be hugely lacking in so many other aspects in terms of a long-term appointment, if you know what I mean. I think that's what's imperative that's avoided here.
Well, Scott McCrory there, a point. I don't believe that we need the box office appointment. We, as supporters, need to believe in what has been offered, a new joined-up structure with short and long-term aims. Kieran, where do you sit with that? You agree with that, or do you think it needs to be the big name to attract season tickets and sell merchandise?
I think I'm inclined to agree with Scott, to be honest. I don't think it's... Celtic fans want to support their club. They want to believe their club. They want something to believe in. The club, as a business, they have an advantage over other types of businesses because their customer base is so loyal and so devoted to them. I don't think it takes a lot. I don't think you need a blockbuster guy. and John was saying like Eddie Howe. I think Eddie Howe covers both bases. I think he would be a blockbuster appointment, and he is someone who can build a long-term project, because that's the type of manager he is. But I am inclined to agree, if they've got, but it can't just be a project guy like Dyler. I think there is a balancing act there. I think there's a halfway point you can reach where they do have good pedigree, they do have decent experience, but they do also have a portfolio of really attacking football, bringing through young players. I think that's what fans want to see, and I think it's definitely achievable. I know sometimes they can feel a bit fatalistic about the types of coaches that can be attracted to the Celtic job. I think I'm more optimistic than most, you can sell it as a big job. And if need be, I know you're saying it can't just be someone who, he's only here very quickly for a route to the Premier League. I think that wouldn't be the worst way to sell it to some people, to some coaches, if you were. And that's what a director of football model would help, where if someone like Rodgers were to, abruptly leave, a director of football would ensure better continuity with the next manager. So I think that way you'd have a really talented coach, but you'd also ensure that if there is a high turnover with those managers leaving every 3 years or so, then you'd still have all the structures in place in terms of the standards of fitness, dieting, the style of play that has to be implemented from academy to first team. That would still be in place regardless of who the manager is. So I'm inclined to agree. It's about what the manager says in terms of what the style of football, the project for fans to believe in necessarily, than just a guy who's done it in England, for example.
Yeah, okay. Well, guys, finally, just to finish off, right, 2 questions to you both. Then, firstly, when do you expect the key appointments to happen? Director of football and manager. Kieran, anytime soon or in summer?
I expect director of football to be announced before the end of the season, and to be very swiftly followed by the manager. Okay,
John, agree with that, or do you think it will be in the coming days, weeks?
I think it will be sooner, purely because of season tickets to sell, and traditionally kind of March is a month where that kind of starts getting pushed. You couldn't conceivably do that at the moment. There's so much uncertainty. So I think they'd want to get the people identified, even if it was somebody that's going to the Euros, but to say this is who we've got, this is who we believe in, and I think on that basis, then they would go for it and then try to sell season tickets. I think that's the kind of the key point here. They've got to get this done before they could ask people to invest their time and money again next season.
Yeah, well, Paulie did just touch on season tickets and another point. Another thing that Celtic need to get right this year, season ticket renewals, whether it's refunds or pricing going forward with incentives. And last question, guys, who's it going to be? Who is the next manager? Kieran, got a name that you would prefer out of the many it's been bandied about?
I'm going to go slightly rogue and say if Swansea don't get promoted, I'm going to go for Steve Cooper.
Steve Cooper, there you go. It's not even on the list. That's an exclusive. Steve Cooper. John, what about yourself?
The name of Eddie Howe has never been far away the last number of months. He's not back in football. I believe he was waiting to see how things would pan out, and I think with certain people moving on, I think the job's now probably more attractive to him than it was. And if I had a spare tenner, I'd stick it in Eddie Howe.
Yeah, good point. I mean, it hasn't gone away. That's us, guys. Listen, thank you to Kieran Devlin from The Athletic. John, thank you very much. John McGarry, Daily Mail, Murdo McLeod. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in and listening and watching. It'll be an interesting few days, few weeks, few months ahead for the Celtic fans. And once again, thanks very much for our sponsors, First Star Legends Gin, Social Recluse, and First Class Transfers. We'll see you again next week.